Ready to go? Yes. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. For 49 seconds after noon. Welcome to our last class of the summer session. We will resume in the fall, and you all got your books, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay, they're back there if you haven't. I just got mine. And our first session in the fall is September 17th. September 17th, okay? And we'll just pick up wherever I leave off today. Resume. Seems like the logical thing to do. Well, Barry's not here today. That's why I have to introduce myself. Okay? So, welcome once again. This is what we talked about last time. We were talking about Philip II. The two great kings in Spanish history are Charles I and Philip II. They're way head and shoulders above, probably more than that, above everyone else. And the ones we're going to be getting to from now on, as far as Spain is concerned, well, as I think I said in the OLLI News Bites, it's all downhill from here. Okay, these people aren't going to measure up. They're not going to measure up one bit. So I'm sorry about that. Not my fault. Remember, as I always like to say, I am a mere conduit of information. That's all. Okay, your humble servant. And we have to, so Escorial, remember, was the great palace that he built near Madrid. It's about, I don't know, 15, 20 miles outside Madrid, where it's the final resting place of most of the Spanish kings, not all of them, but Philip II is there. And so we're going to start off with kind of a downer for our next topic, his death. I don't know why I didn't end that last time, but I think I must have been in a hurry or something, because I hate to start off with such a, I don't know, such a
Morbid?
Yeah, morbid. I don't know. It's a sad. Okay, he died in 1598, as it says there. Here's how he kind of looked later in life. He died at Escorial. That's where he loved to live. He built it, so that was his favorite place. So there he is, September 13th to be exact. He died of cancer. His death was very painful. He suffered severe attack he had gout. Everybody had gout, I think. If you lived beyond 50, you had gout. He had a high fever, had edema. For 52 horrific days, the king deteriorated, laying in bed in excruciating pain. He could no longer be moved to be washed or anything because of the pain. And so they cut a hole in the bottom of his mattress for release of his bodily fluids. Not a pleasant way to go. I guess they hadn't invented morphine yet. Okay. He was succeeded by his son Philip III, who we'll be getting to momentarily. But so we say goodbye to Spain's probably second greatest king. I don't know. I suppose it's up to individual historians to make their own judgments, but Charles I was really he's the guy who brought the Hasburgs to power in Spain, and Philip II kind of just continued what he did, but he had his problems, he had his highs, like the Battle of Lepanto, and his lows, like the Battle of the Armada. He won one and lost the other one, but so that's how things go in history. So let's talk about what I'll just call the rest of the Habsburgs, and as it says, Spain in decline. As I said, it's all downhill from here. Many historians, one of the most interesting things about Spanish history, I find, is that many historians have tried to explain what happened to Spain, why this precipitous decline in the 17th century. Most agree that Castile became the victim of its own glorious history. You live big, you die big. Trying to desperately reenact the imperial glories of an earlier age, perhaps. Harkening back to the Romans or Charlemagne. That's the Castilians saw themselves as special. The crusading zeal born during the Reconquest led Spaniards to commit their attention to both Europe and America, and to pursue the now dead medieval dream of Christian universality, where everyone would belong to the same Christian church, which is not going to happen. But that didn't stop the Spanish from trying to make it happen. When you spend your time trying to create this religious universality, you waste your time on other things. Political concerns and power became, eventually, because of the realization this was not going to happen, then political concerns and just the political power and the military power and influence of Spain began to become more of a pressing matter. But it was too late. This dream went from being an anachronism to becoming just irrelevant. I don't think there's anything worse than becoming irrelevant when you're dealing with monarchy. The enormous facade of imperial Spain was like an elaborate setting, hiding an empty stage with not a playwright in sight. It just was a waste. But don't get me wrong, there were still tons and tons of gold and silver flowing into Spain's coffers across the Atlantic. Some of it ended up in England, but that was a small percentage. To her neighbors, Spain could still appear mighty. But Castile was mired in debt, poverty, pestilence, and growing self-doubt. This erosion of morale was already present by the 1590s, with several foiled conquests and a trio of treaties filled with concessions that the other European nations who were on the rise were forcing on Spain. The monarchy was in retreat. The coming century would be one of political and economic disasters, overseen by a whole parade of feeble, maybe debauched kings, not all of them, but most of them. Especially ironic given that this took place in the wake of Spain's two greatest monarchs, Charles I and Philip II. Yet, it was also a time of spectacular cultural brilliance, ironically. The culmination of the luminous, what Spanish historians call El Siglo del Oro, the century of gold, the golden century, as it is often called. Begun by Philip II, this bitter contrast with what follows has haunted Spaniards down to the present day. It's also ironic that Spain's greatest literary masterpiece, Don Quixote, first published in 1605, was written during this decline and is reflective of it. Of course, you know the author, Miguel de Cervantes, was born in 1547 at Alcalá de Henares near Madrid, and was a contemporary of William Shakespeare's. In fact, the two writers died on the exact same day, April 23rd, 1616. Call that quite a coincidence. He led a full life, having fled Spain after a duel, and he joined the army, as mentioned earlier, fought at the Battle of Lepanto. Later he was captured by Muslims and imprisoned, and ransomed 5 years later. Next he became a tax collector in Seville, but was jailed again, this time for malfeasance. He had many affairs with several actresses. He struggled as a writer and didn't even begin writing Don Quixote until he was 56 years old. And his life was influenced by the glories of Spain, represented by the victory at Lepanto, in which he fought, and the disillusionment of the 17th century. And you know his befuddled hero, Don Quixote, dances between comedy and tragedy, sanity and insanity, optimism and pessimism, idealism and realism, humor and bitter irony, just like Spain in the past century and the coming century. The Don's erstwhile sidekick you see there, Sancho Panza, unlettered but highly perceptive, provides the setting for the novel's playing upon the many contrasts between the two. It is a brilliant parable for a crusading nation that has been doing its own tilting at windmills. That's what Don Quixote did, was he would charge the windmills thinking they were dragons that he was attempting to kill. And so it's kind of ironic that the whole Don Quixote story is kind of reflective, as all good art is, of the period that created it. So let's get on with the rest of the Hasburgs here. Let's begin our march downhill, you might say. Philip the Third, 1598-1621 were his reign, the dates that he reigned. Remember, for kings, it's the dates they reigned, not their birth and death dates. If it's just an ordinary person, if I put you or I up there, it would be our birth and death dates. Okay? Philip the Third looks a little bit like his father, I suppose. When the great Philip II died, clutching the same crucifix that his father had at his deathbed, the bells tolled for 9 days before an uneasy quiet fell over the kingdom. He was loved, Philip II was loved by his people in spite of his mistakes, an enigma to those who were close to him, and certainly has to be judged as a great king, and his heir would have large shoes to fill. Philip III was a weak and inexperienced man. He resembled his father in little bit physical appearance and religious conviction, giving him the moniker Philip the Pious. King at 21, he was devoted to hunting, theater, and religious festivals, but abandoned the role of royal administrator his father found so all-consuming. Remember, Philip II was the world's first royal bureaucrat. He loved signing every letter, reading every communication, everything. And by the way, poor Philip III also assumed an empty treasury and huge debt. Wars are very expensive, as we all know. Philip III also began, probably, if you want to talk about significant things that happened during his reign, Philip III began what became a long tradition from here on out by the rule of royal favorites, I call it. The king didn't want to rule himself, so you appoint a minister. In Spanish, they call him the valido, and they would rule. And what they usually do, of course, is by pandering to the monarch's weaknesses, these validos will basically take him for a ride. The person I'm talking about, as far as Philip III is concerned, is the Duke of Lerma. Nice picture of him. Okay, you always want to have your... Back in those days, you wanted to be on horseback. His real name is Francisco Gomez de Sandoval y Rojas. He rose to the position of favorite and became Spain's real ruler, but was concerned only with his own wealth and power. At a time when Spain needed real reforms, government officials complained they could not see the Duke unless they paid for the privilege. Corruption marked the Duke's tenure. Therefore, probably the only resolute act of Philip III was the expulsion of the Moriscos. The Moriscos, you'll recall, were the converted Moors. Remember in 1492, all Jews and Moors, all Jews and Muslims still in Spain, had to convert to Christianity or they were kicked out of the kingdom. And those that stayed behind and converted, as far as the Moors were concerned, were called Moriscos. But they converted in name only. They still practiced their old religion, most of them. A large percentage of them, I should probably say. And they were expelled from Aragon in 1609. Of course, this hurt Spain more than anything for the same reasons the expulsion of the Jews did over a century earlier. Most of the several 100,000 Moriscos went to Morocco, where ironically they were either killed or enslaved by the Muslims that they were accused of being, who considered them Spanish Christians. Go figure. He also presided over the disastrous entrance of Spain into the 30 Years' War on the side of the Austrian Hasburgs. You see, the Habsburg family had split into two branches, the Spanish Habsburgs and the Austrian Habsburgs. Okay? And if the Austrian Habsburgs are going to war, I suppose it's only a matter of time before the Spanish Habsburgs do too. And in the 30 Years' War, that's what happened. This was a very important war that we've already talked about in our discussion of France, and will again when we get to the Austrian Habsburgs when we study Germany, because Austria is a German state, a German nation. During this war, Portugal won its independence and Catalonia almost did. They rebelled and almost won their independence. They both received aid from the French, who used these breakaway movements as a diversion to keep Spain out of the serious fighting that was going on in the rest of Europe. Although most of these defeats are ascribed to Philip III's heir, who we'll be getting to soon, Philip III, full of unwarranted or warranted, however you want to look at it, contrition for his inconsequential life, died in 1621 at the age of 42. Historians of the period have not been kind to his memory and have variously described him as, and I quote, a whole bunch of quotes here. One historian said he was undistinguished and insignificant man. Another one said he was a miserable monarch. You'd like a little alliteration there. Another one said his only virtue appeared to reside in the total absence of vice. Which, you know, you got to give credit where credit is due, I suppose. More generally, Philip has largely retained the reputation of a weak, dim-witted monarch who preferred hunting and traveling to governing, which he left to others. But you have to feel sorry for him, since anyone who followed Philip II would pale in comparison. It was, as they say, a tough act to follow. His marriage to Margaret of Austria did produce 8 children, one of whom succeeded him as Philip IV upon his death on March 31st, 1621. His daughter, Anne of Austria, became the consort of Louis XIII of France. And there's a story told during Philip III's reign that one day he was looking out the window of the palace and he saw a man reading something on the street side and suddenly struck himself in the forehead and then laughed out loud, to which Philip responded, "That man is either mad or he's reading Don Quixote." It seems, like I said before, that the irony of Cervantes' story fit perfectly the uselessness of Philip III's reign. So, let's move on to Philip IV. Philip IV wasn't like his father. He became a notorious libertine who entertained an endless succession of mistresses whom he packed off to convents when he grew tired of them. He then became tormented by guilt and confessed his sins in a series of extraordinary letters to a nun he had befriended, whose name was Sor Maria de Agria. Obsessed with death, he spent hours lying in his burial crypt at the Escorial. But he still found the time and energy to father some 30 illegitimate children. So he didn't spend all his time lying in that crypt. Okay? Since he was thusly so occupied, is one way of putting it, I suppose, the kingdom was ruled by his favorite, whose name was Count Gaspar de Guzman, the Duke of Olivares. So I'll be referred to from now on as Olivares, the Duke of Olivares. The Duke of Olivares has the distinction of being the most capable of all Spanish favorites, usually judged to be on a par with France's Cardinal Richelieu. You remember Richelieu, Louis XIII's erstwhile minister. Louis XV's. Olivares did reform many aspects of the Spanish monarchy by cutting extravagance and purging the bloated bureaucracy, which certainly needed purging. But he could not stop the loss of the United Provinces, today's Netherlands, which was one of Spain's most valuable possessions in Europe, or prevent its entrance into the dreaded 30 Years' War that I just talked about, in which his father had already committed Spain. He also nearly lost Catalonia to the French, and did lose Portugal, who won back its independence in 1641. By 1660, Spain, or namely Castile, was dying. And Spain's enemies became, well, hopeful mourners. Philip IV finally succumbed to a skin disease in 1665. He left a 3-year-old boy as the final hope of the beleaguered nation, but instead became what one historian called, and I quote, the last stunted sprig of a degenerate line. Indeed, Spain had become a second-rate nation ruling a first-rate empire. Such a situation did not bode well for the future, as European powers seemed to fight each other, getting in line for who was going to take what they could when the end finally came. And that end will come under Charles II. Now, pay close attention here, and I hope you bought it. Once again, I hope you bought a program, because you're going to have a hard time telling who the players are without looking at the numbers on the back. Okay, so here I go. Charles II looked a lot like his father, didn't he? A lot of resemblance there. But that's the Hasburgs for you. His sobriquet, his nickname, his moniker, whatever you want to call it, he was called the Sufferer. The Sufferer. And let's see why. Let's see if we can figure out why they would call him the Sufferer. All right? As it says there, he was the last of the Hasburgs. So the Habsburg run of beginning male heirs to the throne is going to come to a smashing, and deadly end here. He could have been the poster boy for the genetic problems caused by the constant intermarriage among the Habsburgs, to the point where his death was awaited almost from the moment of his birth in 1661. He became the primary victim of Habsburg inbreeding. His father, that just discussed, Philip IV of Spain, was his uncle, and his mother, who was Mariana of Austria, you'll see her in a minute, was Philip's niece, making Charles not only her son, but also her great nephew. He was short, lame, epileptic, senile, completely bald by 35. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't know why I left that in there. What's wrong with that? Also, from the moment of his birth, he was manipulated by various political factions throughout his life. These factions included members of his immediate family and the court who sought to steer Spain either toward France and the Bourbons or toward Austria and the Hasburgs. And then throw in a bunch of Italians that came in too. And you're going to meet some of them. Okay? Although this picture has been moderated in recent years by recent historical scholarship, and he has now been described as well-meaning and kind, although of limited intelligence. I guess that's better. Okay? Like many of his Habsburg predecessors, his deformed jaw, which you can see pretty plainly there. And remember, when I say you can see it pretty plainly, that's probably only 10% of how bad it really was. Because if you were the artist painting the king's picture, would you want to emphasize his negative qualities, his physical imperfections? I don't think so. You might lose your job, if not something else. Okay? So yeah, he has the Habsburg jaw there, no doubt about it. It was so bad for him, his teeth didn't meet, and he couldn't chew his food properly. For a short time under Don Juan Jose of Austria, as his favorite, as his valido, the nobility came to dominate Spain. Once again, the nobility came back into power. After overthrowing the regent, he was only 4 when he became king, and his mother, Mariana, we're going to meet more of Mariana in a minute, his father's widow was the regent who ruled for him. But she then had to contest with all these other factions to try to control the country. Most were incompetent and self-serving, as I said, but there were a few good men, such as the Count of Oropesa, who managed, despite ruinous deflation, to stabilize the currency, which was an accomplishment in itself. Others tried to weaken the power of the Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was still going on at this time, but it had become such a powerful branch and influence over the government that even nobody liked it. Even some church members didn't like it. And it'll be abolished in the early 19th century, in 1808. But the Inquisition, sometimes the Grand Inquisitor, who was in charge of the Inquisition, would try to influence the king too and determine who, for example, the next heir was going to be. All right? Even so, Spain's economy, especially in Castile, crumbled. And its population decreased by nearly 2 million people. That's probably about 1/10, almost 1/10 of the population during the 17th century, during the 1600s. This is partially due to plague outbreaks and partially due to the huge casualties caused by the almost continuous warfare. And finally, the lives of the overburdened peasants were so miserable that peasants didn't want to have any children. Why have children in a situation like that? The period between 1677 and 1686, a 9-year period, is considered to be the worst, with famine, plague, natural disasters, and economic chaos. Immigration to the New World increased. France was now strong and united under Louis XIV, and the Treaty of the Pyrenees in 1659 took Spain's place as the most dominant power of Europe. 3 main wars were fought during this period. First was the War of the Devolution, 1667 to 1668, in which the French armies of Louis XIV overran the Habsburg-controlled Spanish Netherlands, only to be pressured into giving it back by a triple alliance of England, Sweden, and the Dutch Republic in the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. Next came the Franco-Dutch War of 1672-1678, in which a minor Spanish victory had to be surrendered later. And finally, the War of the Grand Alliance, 1688-1697, sometimes called the 9 Years' War, in which Spain once again found itself allied with the Habsburg Holy Roman Empire against France in order to hang on to what was left of the Spanish Netherlands in the south, or what today we call Belgium. Although Spain lost only the free county of Burgundy as a result of these wars, it had demonstrated to the world its weakness. As the years passed with no heir, all of Europe began to salivate at getting a piece of Spain's empire. Of course, the 2 families who vied for this prize were the Habsburgs and the Bourbons. The only question was, would they divide up the spoils before or after Charles dies? Of course, the simplest way to avoid all this, we could have ended all this drama, was for Charles to get his wife pregnant and produce an heir. But as you know, this simple thing has confounded many monarchs throughout history. And here we have another situation in which the king's reproductive system takes center stage. That were so bad, his problems were so bad, it'd make us forget about that guy, Henry VIII. All right? So, from the moment of his birth, the royal family and the royal court set about scheming to help things along. At 18, he was married to Marie-Louise of Orleans, a French princess. Okay? She was the 16-year-old granddaughter of Louis XIII of France, and the niece of Louis XIV, of course, also of France, and Bourbons. All right? Alas, the union produced no children, either because of ignorance about sexual matters. Remember, they didn't offer sex ed in schools back in those days. Okay? They didn't offer sex ed when I was at school. I had to learn it other ways, and I'm not going to go into what those ways were. Okay? No. So ignorance of sexual matters was a problem. It was definitely a problem. I mean, I don't know anything about these things. Like I say, but that's just what they say. All right? Or maybe he was impotent. Or both. Ignorance of sexual matters and impotent. That's a double whammy if there ever was one. Okay? Or it could have been, I don't know, this is not me saying this is just what I read about. And remember, I'm the mere conduit of information. It could have been Charles's ugliness. I'll let you be the judge. Okay? I don't pass judgments on things like that. In fact, at the time the marriage was arranged with Princess Marie, at the time the marriage was arranged, the French ambassador wrote, and I quote, "The king is so ugly as to cause fear, and he always looks ill." Unquote. Okay, close quote. But in spite of that, the wedding plans proceeded. Needless to say, the marriage had more than its share of problems. Queen Marie-Louise complained that Charles, once again, this is what I read about, Charles suffered from premature ejaculation. Now, I don't know if they had tabloids back in those days, but somehow people found out about that. And boy, the Queen Mother, Mother Mariana, she was very unhappy when this was made public. Okay? And I think I do have a picture of Mother Mariana there. Okay, there she is. Who occasionally returned as regent. From time to time, when the king got sick, there would be a regent, and usually it was his mother who's still around. She's still around. Mariana of Austria, who, of course, was a Habsburg. But Mother Mariana had her own strange ideas and behaviors concerning the king's problems in the bedroom. For example, when the royal astrologer suggested, and back in those days, astrology was important. People were superstitious, and people put a lot of faith in astrology. There was a royal astrologer. And the royal astrologer suggested that the cause of Charles's reproductive problems goes back to his absence at his father's death, and he therefore could not kiss him goodbye. I think this astrologer, don't laugh, I think this astrologer was a forerunner of Sigmund Freud. Okay? Whereupon, I'm not done with this story. Whereupon, she had his the father's decomposing body disinterred so he could perform the gory act. Now, I don't know about you, but that probably is enough to ruin anyone's libido or libido. Libido. You say libido, I say libido. Okay? Once again, I took a course in Freudian psychology, so I know about these things. Okay? Had to write down our dreams. That was our homework assignment, writing down our dreams. Some of them I didn't write down, but the ones I could, I did. Okay? In the meantime, poor Marie Louise, back to the Queen consort, who you used to see up there, poor Marie Louise had to undergo various and sundry, quote-unquote, physical fertility treatments. And we can only guess what that involved. Okay? Apparently these treatments were very, very painful, causing her severe digestive problems. Don't ask. And she became severely depressed. The heartbroken Marie Louise died 10 years later in February of 1689. Okay? But, still in need of a male heir, back to Mother Mariana up there, comes to the rescue and arranges Charles's marriage to the 23-year-old Maria Anna of Neuburg, the daughter of Philip William, the Elector of the Palatinate, which is one of a German state, a very important German state, because he was an elector, and there were only 7 electors. The electors, as we'll learn when we get to Germany, they elected the Holy Roman Emperor, who ruled half of Europe, although in a sense. Okay? And she was also the sister-in-law of his uncle, Leopold I, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, as Leopold I. And, of course, a Habsburg. It was thought that this would be a fruitful union and somewhat of a litmus test for poor Charles, since her parents had 17 children. And if they can be fruitful and multiply, so should she. And if she couldn't, well, that's why I say it was a litmus test for Charles. However, I'm sorry to report that this marriage was no more successful than the first in producing the much desired heir to the throne. And by the way, there's more to this story. I'm not done. By the way, after his death, an autopsy was performed on poor Charles, and he only had one testicle, and it was atrophied, hard as a rock. Okay? So the guy was probably sterile his entire adult life. Who knows? Who knows? Well, the struggle goes on. Okay, it appears that having an heir the normal way in the family is not going to work. So as time went on, people kind of gave up on poor Charles. And they thought, well, let's talk about who's going to inherit the throne. And if they do inherit the throne, will they inherit everything that Charles has, which goes back to his grandfather Philip II, all the rich colonies in America, all the possessions in Europe, all of the Iberian Peninsula, except Portugal. They lost Portugal. Or shall we divvy it up? Somebody will take this, somebody will take that, somebody will take this, somebody will take that. And of course, what do you suppose the European powers are going to want to do? The former or the latter? They going to give the heir everything, or do they want to divvy it up? They want to divvy it up. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. And there's a big pie to divvy up, as you'll see. So let's... Now, I know it says the War of the Spanish Succession up there at the top, but that's going to happen. I'm setting the stage for the War of the Spanish Succession, which I've already talked about because it was very important as far as Spain and England were concerned. But there's a whole bunch more to the story. See, that's the neat thing about I think, this is my opinion, that's the neat thing about the way I organize this class, because there are certain events that Spain, France, England, the German states, and Russia are all going to take part in, but every time we go to a different one, you get to see it from a different angle. How this event took place from this angle, and then how these guys looked at it. It kind of, I think it makes it interesting. That's just my feeling, okay? Anyway, there's Charles. There's Charles, the subject of the hour, right here. And here's Philip IV, his father. We just talked about him. Here's Mother Mariana. Okay, talked about her. The number 2 means that's his second wife. This is his first wife. Okay? And notice how Philip IV, he married a Bourbon, and then he married a Hasburg. See? Arranging marriages was a big way for the royal families of Europe to influence world history. Okay, now what's going to happen is, I'm going to be mentioning, because I have to take this down and show you the other people, but who's going to take his place? There are no children. Notice you don't see a line coming down here, do you? So there aren't going to be any children. He's not going to have any children. All right? So the ones in bold-faced type, like Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria, Archduke Charles, Leopold, the Holy Roman Emperor I just mentioned, Philip, the Duke of Anjou, who is the son of Louis le Grand Dauphin of France. These are going to be, people are going to think, these are the principal candidates. These would all love a piece of the pie. So we've got the Holy Roman Empire here. We've got Austria, which partially was in the Holy Roman Empire, partially not, but a powerful kingdom of its own. We've got Bavaria was part of the Holy Roman Empire. That's a German state. Not quite as big as it is today. But notice he was also the Prince of Asturias, okay, which is a Spanish kingdom. And here you've got a Bourbon. Okay, you've got a Bourbon because he's descended from here's Louis XIV, the Sun King. Okay, what a mess, huh? That's why I said you need a program. Okay, all right, now use your mind's eye. Use your mind's eye here, and take a snapshot of that because it's about to disappear. Right? You have to have a photographic memory here. Sorry. Each time Charles lapsed into one of his many illnesses, the 2 powerful dynasties, the Hasburgs and the Bourbons, realized that this struggle, wait a minute, if he dies, suddenly, oh boy, are we going to have a war. We're going to have a major war. And we don't want that, even though they will. But this is Europe, the most war-torn area on the face of the earth. Okay? But they thought, let's try to forestall a major war. So in 1698, during one of these illnesses, Britain, France, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Dutch Republic signed the Treaty of The Hague. The Hague is the capital of the United Provinces. It's in the Netherlands today. In fact, is it the capital? Is it the capital of the Netherlands? Anyway, they decided in this treaty to name 6-year-old Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria, who you just saw up there. Okay? Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria. Since he's German, he's, I believe he was Habsburg. Must have been Habsburg. The heir to most of Spain and its possessions. Joseph Ferdinand was the son of Charles's niece, Maria Antonia of Austria, who was up there. I believe she was up there. The treaty also gave parts of the Spanish Empire to France and Austria in order to get their support, and a little bit to England, although I can't remember offhand what England got. They will end up with something anyway, don't worry about them. This treaty was meant to check the rising power of Bourbon France. Because France was the big kid on the block at this time. They were a big bully. And led by the Sun King, Louis XVI, right? It also, this treaty, called for Charles to write a will, stipulating that Joseph Ferdinand as heir to the Spanish throne. Which he did. Which he did. Okay? He didn't know what to do, so he did. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, Joseph Ferdinand contracts smallpox, which was a deadly disease back in those days. It's pretty much been eradicated now. But it was more than half you were going to die from it. Not everybody did, but more than a 50-60% chance you were going to die from it. Okay? But remember what Edward Jenner noticed? Edward Jenner? He noticed that people who had smallpox or a related disease called cowpox, like milkmaids, once they caught it, they never caught it again. He just happened to notice that, which was about all he needed to invent vaccination, which he got from cowpox. The Latin word for cow is vacca, and from vacca we get vaccination. Okay? And cowpox was not as deadly, nowhere near as deadly. In fact, it was a minor fever. So he would infect people with cowpox, and not only never caught cowpox again, he never caught smallpox again. Right? When my son was born in 1969, when I took him in for his 500-mile checkup, the doctor gave him his smallpox vaccination. And he has this ugly scar right here on his shoulder. And when he was old enough, he said, "Hey, Dad, what's that?" So I explained to him about smallpox. I didn't say anything to him. But then 2 years later, in 1972, 3 years later, my daughter was born. And I took her in for a 500-mile checkup. And the doctor said, "Hey, she's fine. Everything good. Yeah, good. See you in next year." I said, "Wait a minute. What about her smallpox vaccination? You didn't give her a smallpox vaccination." "Oh, haven't you heard? It's been eradicated." Eradicated. And I said, "Really?" So think Edward Jenner, if anybody deserves the Nobel Peace Prize forever, it's Edward Jenner. The number of lives that man saved runs into the millions and millions of people. Amazing. Amazing. Well, anyway, I got sidetracked there. Sorry. But poor Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria contracted smallpox and dies in 1699. So in 1700, another treaty was agreed to. This one's called the Treaty of London, which named Archduke Charles of Austria, a Habsburg, as the heir to the Spanish throne. And of course, King Charles had to tear up his old will and had to write a new will, stipulating Archduke Charles of Austria as the heir to the throne, which he did. Unfortunately, Archduke Charles, or actually his name was Karl, since he's German, they use his German name Karl with a K, okay, not a C, with a K. If you prefer his German name, had a less than ideal direct line of succession to the throne, but that really didn't matter anyway, since the Spanish people had by now let it be known that they abhorred the idea of being ruled by another German prince, like Charles I was, who was also in line to be the Holy Roman Emperor, like Charles I was, and did become the Holy Roman Emperor. So Charles II changes his will a third time. A third time. If nothing else, he kept his lawyer rich. But lawyers get rich anyway, don't they? Well, I don't know. I know a few that are starting. And in this case, the third will mentions Louis XIV's grandson, Philip of Anjou, as the heir to the throne. This was done at the suggestion of a cardinal, the Archbishop of Toledo, the Archbishop of Toledo is the #1 official of the Roman Catholic Church in Spain. Okay, he's the #1 guy.
He's the Holy Toledo?
He's the Holy Toledo. Okay, probably where that expression comes from. You got it. Thank you. Cardinal Portocarrero is his name. Portocarrero. Who was pro-French. And it is believed that he was most likely acting at the direction of the man who was now the most powerful monarch in Europe, of course, I've already been talking about him, might as well take another look at him, in case you forgot what a grand monarch he was. The Sun King, Louis the 16th. Excuse me, Louis the 14th. Louis the 16th was not a grand monarch. Legend has it that Portocarrero placed his altered will in Charles's lap while he was barely conscious and just able to scribble Yo el Rey, which means I the king, which is his way of proclaiming this will. And in these matters, as you can well imagine, timing is everything, since 2 days later, Charles dies on November 1st, 1700, at the age of 39. And Philip of Anjou was proclaimed King Philip V of Spain. Which, by the way, in the official proclamation, they still aren't using the word Spain yet. They use Castile and Aragon. Aragon. Still, going all the way back to the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella. Okay? The Spanish Habsburgs, who ruled from 1516 to 1700, 184 years, were no more. They're gone. King Philip VI, who is the present king of Spain today, Philip VI, as of 2014, kind of new on the job, is a descendant of Philip V, and likewise a Bourbon. But it's not a continuous, by any stretch of the imagination, it's not a continuous, unbroken string, as you shall see. As you shall see. So, bye-bye Charles II, the sufferer. Can you imagine what kind of life he must have led with all this going on around him? Oh, boy. I wouldn't take a job as king if you handed it to me. All right? So, there's King Philip V of Spain. That's his first official portrait. Let's talk about the War of the Spanish Succession, 1701-1714. The English called it Queen Anne's War because it took place pretty much entirely during those years roughly correspond to the reign of Queen Anne of England, who was a little bit wacko herself. Okay? Let's take a look at a map. Time to look at a map. I'm sorry, you'll see why I had to make it small. All right. Here's Spain. Here's France. You see all these little different colors here? All these little different dots and different splashes of color? Those are all the German states, which make the study of Germany horrendous. Because there are actually hundreds of kingdoms. Only the main ones are up there. Hundreds of them, all with their own king, their own flag. Some had a national anthem by then. National anthems were starting to come in at this time. Some didn't. But boy, what a mess, huh? What a mess. Okay? Notice this whole area of southern Italy, including the island of Sardinia. And southern Italy, called the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies later, it all belonged to Spain. Okay? And here's the Spanish Netherlands here, the Spanish with which they will lose. And you see the same little splashes of color here in northern Italy. It all belong to Spain. And I don't even have North and South America on this map. You can triple or quadruple that belongs to Spain. Okay? Now the problem with everything I've said so far about these treaties and what happened and the wills that Charles II left, the problem with all this was the big fly in the ointment. Since Philip of Anjou was Louis XIV's grandson, what does that mean? Well, what if Louis XIV dies? Isn't Philip of Anjou in line to become the king of France also? You betcha. Okay? And most of the rest of Europe, namely England, the Dutch Republic, the German states, notably Prussia, Hanover, and the Holy Roman Emperor, and Austria, whose candidate was edged out by Philip, had great fears of a potential superpower, super nation, mega country, whatever you want to call it, if the same person ruled both Spain and France. Look what this would mean. Huge country here. Look at this. I mean, if you were this guy, wouldn't you be kind of afraid of somebody like that? Or even if you were this guy, or this guy, or this guy, wouldn't you be afraid of that? Because they're just going to take over the whole thing. I mean, come on. And France was a rising power. Now Spain was a declining power, but they still had all that gold and silver coming in from the New World there. Don't laugh at it. Maybe they would call it Spanish. Or frame. They could call it frame. And they would speak French. Or Spanish. I don't know. Your imagination can run wild with you. And this would be one hugely powerful nation. Just from the point of military power. And if you stop and think about religion, which everybody thought about religion back then, well, what religion is Spain? They're Catholic. What religion is France? They're Catholic. So if you're Protestant England, or Protestant Prussia, or Protestant Northern German states, guess what? The Spanish dream of universality, Christian religion in Europe, is about to happen. Because if they do take over it all, they're going to burn you Protestants at the stake. You don't stand a chance. And boy, they didn't like that. So, something has to be done. Something has to be done. As one minister noted, it's as if the Pyrenees ceased to exist. The Pyrenees are the mountain range that separates France from Spain across here. Okay? Thus, Louis XIV, in one fell swoop, undid all the work that his predecessor's chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu, did to establish a balance of power in Europe. Cardinal Richelieu was perhaps the wisest non-ruling monarch that ever existed in Europe, because he understood politics, warfare, political power, and so forth. And he realized that in order to preserve the peace, the best way to preserve the peace is a balance of power. Don't let one nation get too powerful, because then they'll try to take over everything, which is exactly what happened over and over and over and over again. The War of the Spanish Succession, what has happened here, Louis XIV, by urging Charles to designate his grandson as the heir, he has thrown balance of power out the window. It's gone. So, they're all going to go to war to stop it from happening. Sometimes the War of the Spanish Succession is called history's first modern war because it wasn't fought for religious reasons. Not really. It's fought for political reasons, maintaining the balance of power, a political concept. Let's see. Philip was forced to fight a rearguard action against the Spaniards, who supported the Hasburg claims to the throne. In fact, the just discussed Habsburg claimant, Archduke Charles, invaded the Iberian Peninsula using Barcelona as his base, as he tried to unite Valencia and Aragon to his side with some success. These kingdoms openly rebelled against Philip, but Philip defeated the Hasburgs at the Battle of Almansa. The Bourbon army was commanded by the Duke of Berwick, an illegitimate son of James II of England, while the Habsburg forces were led by Henri de Massue, the Earl of Galway, an exiled French Huguenot. The Huguenots were French Protestants. This makes Almansa perhaps the most ironic battle in history, in which the English forces were commanded by a Frenchman and the French forces were commanded by an Englishman. You will never find that again. Okay? Okay, break time. By the way, I mentioned Queen Anne a little while ago of England, who is known just as Queen Anne. The last of the Stuarts, by the way. She was the end of the Stuart dynasty in England. But there was a movie out not too long ago called The Favorite, which wasn't one of my favorites. In fact, I wanted to get up and leave halfway through, but my wife wouldn't let me. But on August 9th, is that right, the 9th? What's today? Friday they're going to have a showing, right? We're right in this room. Right in this room. So if maybe you'll like it better than I did. It even got nominated. I couldn't believe it. Not my kind of movie, I guess.
The advantage now is now we know about what was going on, so we're more interested.
That's not going to help you. That's not going to help you one bit in this one. But boy, it's kind of a weird movie. If you like kind of weird movies, hey. I think, well, she was grossly overweight. Even more so than I think she was portrayed in the movie. Because when she died, she was buried in like a piano box. And she had to be carried around on a sedan chair for the last 5-6 years of her reign. And she did have a couple of girlfriends. That's true. Not that there's anything wrong with it. But I don't know. Go see it. Let me know what you think. Okay? Okay, we're right now smack dab in the middle of the War of the Spanish Succession. Now, I'm not going to fight the battles of the war. It had its kind of seesaw effect. One side was winning and the other side was winning and one side was winning. And I think what happened in this war was all sides concerned. It involved virtually everybody you see on that map. I don't think Russia got involved, but Russia's not much of Russia on that map anyway. But they just were exhausted from all the fighting. So the war ended. Everybody sent. They sent. Where are you? Where am I? There you go. How's that? Is that good? That's good. They sent representatives to Utrecht, which is in central Holland. Utrecht, it's still there, I believe. Where they discussed a treaty, a way to end the war. Utrecht is a perfect example. It's called the Peace of Utrecht or the Treaty of Utrecht. This is a perfect example of a treaty with many more to follow in Europe of post-war treaties drawn up to restore the balance of power that the war, that's the subject of the treaty, upset in the first place. Now, the best way to find out who won and lost this war is to see what the treaty said. Because they were going to use their powers of redrawing the map of Europe, and here's the new map of Europe, and I know it looks the same, but if you look carefully, there are some differences between these two maps. One of them is Europe in 1700, the other one is Europe in 1714. Before and after. This is the before and after. Okay? By looking at what the powers did in the Treaty of Utrecht, we can kind of see who won and who lost this war. And it will be a compromise. Everybody's going to get something, but everybody's not going to get everything they want. It's kind of like my parents would say when they, there were 4 of us children in my family, but sometimes there were only 2 cookies or 1 cookie in the cookie jar. And so my parents would break the cookie into 4 parts. But let me tell you something. It's humanly impossible to break a cookie exactly in half, and especially impossible into fourths. And so my parents heard about it when one kid got more than the other one did. Guaranteed. Okay? But that's what they tried to do here. They tried to break the cookie. First of all, the treaty said probably the most important question of the day was, is Philip still the king of Spain? Philip, Louis XIV's grandson, still the king of Spain? And the answer is yes. Philip was recognized as King Philip V of Spain. However, he had to renounce his place in the French line of succession. So no France and Spain. No frame, no stance. Okay? Not going to happen. Same person is not going to rule both. Thereby precluding the union of the French and Spanish crown. So Louis XIV got some, but not all, of what he wanted in the first place. The treaty also went on to say that Philip retains the Spanish overseas empire, in America, but ceded the southern Netherlands, Naples is in Italy, you all know where Napoli is, Milan, that's in northern Italy, and Sardinia, the island, to Austria. And this begins Austria's long stay in Italy, which will last until 1871, I believe. Okay? So, another way to restore European equilibrium was to reward and punish by the giving and the taking away of land. Sicily and parts of, you'll notice Sicily's a different color there. Sicily and parts of the Milanese, from Milan, the Milanese holdings, went to Savoy, which is a kingdom in northern Italy. And perhaps one of the most significant awards of territory went to England. In fact, I think the most important clause in this treaty rewarded, you see, England's an island. So it's going to be tough to add something else to England because it's an island. You can't, it's just there. So what did they do? Well, they awarded England the Strait of Gibraltar. Right here. Right here. Okay? Which actually the Brits had grabbed a combined Anglo-Dutch fleet in the second or third year of the war, 1703, sticks in my mind. They grabbed Gibraltar, which was a little peninsula that sticks out, juts out into the Strait of Gibraltar, and there's a great big rock, which one insurance company uses as their corporate logo. As the, I can't remember which one it is. Prudential, is that it? Okay, thank you. They also, by the way, awarded Minorca to Great Britain, and this was in perpetuity. In perpetuity means forever. Okay? You ever see the movie Sandlot? Great movie. If you like baseball at all, if you like kids, go watch. It's on your cable TV. They show it every day practically. Sandlot, it's a great movie. And there's a kid in Sandlot that keeps going forever. So, one of my all-time favorite movies. Much better movie than this one. Okay, maybe you should show Sandlot sometime. I'll bet you get a lot of people there to see it. Huh? You already have? Oh well. Not an intellectual movie because it's a baseball movie. But, well, don't tell any baseball players I said that. Okay. Gibraltar turns out to be a very, 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 very valuable piece of real estate. The English, of course, built a Navy base there as soon as they could. There kind of was already one there. And, of course, today there's an air base there. And let me tell you something. When you control straits, wars have been fought over straits, and this is one of them. This happens to be, straits are tremendously important strategic things. Because whoever controls this strait controls the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Not to mention the land all along the shores. Straits. I mean, look what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, the United States and Iran are getting ready to go at it over a little strip of water. Wars have been fought over straits, and for good reason. They're very, very, very important, okay? In fact, remember when, this is a sad thing to remember. Remember when Prince Charles and Lady Diana got married?
Yes, I was there.
Kind of sad, isn't it? It's a sad story. Well, when they went on their honeymoon, back up to the wedding, all kings, all presidents, all prime ministers in the entire world were invited to this wedding. I think it was in St. Paul's Cathedral. Okay? Everybody came or either went to the registry and looked up and sent a gift, except for one. One nation did not send their political leaders, and the king of that nation did not go and did not send a gift. That was Spain. King Juan Carlos didn't even answer the invitation. Why? Because Spain wants Gibraltar back. And they've been trying to get it back ever since. It's their land. It was theirs historically. They want it back. And remember that little war when Argentina grabbed the Falkland Islands, or the Islas Malvinas, as they call them? And England went to war, lost a heavy cruiser, and I don't know how many hundreds of English sailors and soldiers and airmen killed. And Argentina likewise lost a battleship which we had given them. Lost a battleship in this war. Over a tiny little, it's got 50,000 sheep and about 3 people live on it. Why? Why did Britain go to war to take back these insignificant, not even strategically important islands off the coast of Argentina in the southern Atlantic? Well, many historians think they did it because they didn't want Spain to get any ideas. Because if they let Argentina take the Falklands, then Spain might try to take Gibraltar. And there's no way they're going to give them Gibraltar. They haven't yet. Okay? Little piece of strategic real estate. Very, very important. Britain, I don't know, I can't say this because I can't prove it, but a great deal that has to do with the British victory in World War I, and especially in World War II, has to do with the fact that the British controlled the Strait of Gibraltar. No one else. Okay? So that's why I think that's probably the most significant part of the War of the Spanish Succession, was that Britain got Gibraltar. Okay?
Just a coincidence that they also got Scotland.
Well, Scotland by that time they had signed a treaty in 1701. They signed a treaty uniting the 2 kingdoms.
Didn't have anything.
Didn't have anything to do with the war. No. Let's see what else. In addition to all of that, and I've talked about this before, King Philip V, granted the British the exclusive right to the non-Spanish slave trading in Spanish America for 30 years. Remember the asiento? The permission to sell slaves from Africa? A horrible thing to talk about, but it happened. The British won the asiento for 30 years. For 30 years, which was extremely lucrative. But remember the ironic thing. The British experience with the African slave trade was so horrible that it was the British who led the way in the manumission and in the abolition movement of slavery. The British colonies and England abolished, one of the first countries to abolish it, okay? In Europe. Let's see. In North America, where the war was called Queen Anne's War, France also gave up various colonial possessions, recognizing British sovereignty over Rupert's Land and Newfoundland, and ceding Acacia and half of St. Kitts. Almost all of that is from, except for St. Kitts, is part of Canada. The Acadian cession contained ambiguous language concerning boundaries, setting the stage for future conflicts, since the Peace of Utrecht also neglected to account for Native American claims to the same areas. Tribes of northeastern North America did not immediately make peace. Some tribes signed the 1713 Treaty of Portsmouth, but disputes between colonists and the northeastern tribes of Native Americans continued for decades afterward. And that's why when the American Revolution broke out, a lot of the Indian tribes sided with the British rather than the Americans. With the Peace of Utrecht, the wars to prevent French hegemony, or hegemony, however you want to say that one, that had dominated the latter part of the 17th century and now the beginning of the 18th century were over for the time being. France had broken the threat of encirclement by Habsburg powers and of France and Spain, both now under Bourbon monarchs. Remained allies during the following years. Britain was a major beneficiary of Utrecht, making it a Mediterranean sea power and adding to its dominance in North America. Austria also fared well, consolidating its territories in Italy. That's why a lot of what you see here, a lot of this area in northern Italy here, this is Switzerland, but this area right here, the Tyrol, and what later became Austria, is going to dominate that area until 1871, until the 1870s. Okay? Let's see. Well, anyway, and by the way, the Dutch finally celebrated official recognition of their independence won over a century earlier, but the Spanish would never concede to Dutch independence. But this treaty finally included a clause in which Spain had to recognize the Netherlands, the Dutch kingdom, the United Provinces, as it's called. Okay, so very important war, the War of the Spanish Succession. We might mention it again when we talk about Austria. I don't know, we'll have to see. Okay, so it's now the Spanish Bourbons are in charge. And notice the breakups. They ruled from 1700 to 1808, and then there was an interlude, and you can probably guess what that is all about. 1813 to 1868, and then there was another little recess, and then 1875 to 1931, and then you can guess what that one was, and we'll cover them anyway. And then 1975 to the present, because the king is still a monarchy, although it's a constitutional monarchy. All right? So let's talk about these Bourbons, and we'll start with the guy we've already been talking about, Philip V. Same guy, but he's a Bourbon. And notice his reign. His reign's kind of broken up too, isn't it? You'll see why. You'll see why. The Spanish branch of the House of Bourbons was founded by Philip V. He was born in 1683. And probably the most famous place in Europe at the time, Versailles. He was born at Versailles, the Grand Palace of Louis XIV. He was the second son of what was called the Grand Dauphin. The son of Louis XIV was the Grand Dauphin, and he was the son of that. That's why he's Louis' grandson. He was the Duke of Anjou, and probably never expected to be raised to a rank higher than that. That due to the secondary nature of his birth, he just wasn't in line. He was kind of probably like Prince Harry is today. I don't think Prince Harry entertains any notions that he's ever going to be King of England. Prince William does, but his older brother, but not Prince Harry. Okay. He's busy with Meghan now anyway, so he doesn't have time to think about that. However, just as discussed, King Charles II of Spain, dying without issue, willed the throne to him, as you know. And he did have a somewhat noble but not royal resume. He kind of looks pretty royal, doesn't he? Being that he was the Duke of Anjou, the younger grandson of his eldest sister, Marie-Therese, who was the daughter of King Philip IV of Spain, who had married Louis XIV of France. It's amazing how they all married each other. So why the disjointed reign for him? On January 14, 1724, Philip abdicated the throne to his eldest son, 17-year-old, his name was Louis. Now Louis the First, as he became, for reasons still subject to debate, he never said why he was doing this. So we can only guess, and there are several theories. One theory suggests that Philip V, who exhibited many elements of mental instability during his reign, did not wish to reign due to his increasing mental situation, his decreasing mental situation, you might say. A second theory relates the abdication to an ongoing problem with the Bourbon dynasty. The French royal family recently had lost many legitimate heirs to disease. Indeed, Philip V's abdication occurred just over a month after the death of the Duke of Orleans, okay, who had been regent for Louis XV of France. The War of the Spanish Succession had proven how destructive the lack of an heir could be. And Philip realized his predicament made another continental war of succession a distinct possibility. Philip V was a legitimate descendant of Louis XIV. But the Treaty of Utrecht, as I just said, forbade the union of the French and Spanish crown. So in effect, he was not an heir to Louis XIV's holdings in France. Another theory supposes that Philip V hoped that by abdicating the Spanish crown, he could circumvent the treaty and succeed to the French throne. Instead, since that wouldn't unite the two crowns, because he just abdicated as King of Spain, so maybe that'll put him back in line to return to his beloved place of his birth, Versailles, as King of France. Maybe he thought that. Okay? In any case, disaster struck, because shortly after this was done, his abdication, Louis died in August of 1724 in Madrid of, you guessed it, smallpox. Having reigned only 7 months and leaving no issue. So Philip was forced to return to the Spanish throne as his younger son. And later, Philip VI was not yet of age. Wasn't old enough. Anyway, if you add up the years of Philip V's reign, the two reigns together equal 46 years, which is the longest of any Spanish monarch. So he's the Queen Victoria? No, he's the Queen Elizabeth II of Spain. Longest reign. Okay? The long reign and the new dynasty was to have a moderating effect on the Spanish decline previously noted. But it was a time of interminable warfare with little or no lasting gains. As Samuel Johnson once remarked, 18th century European politics is much too complicated to understand or to bother with. Thanks a lot for putting me out of a job. Although he managed to break the gloomy Habsburg spell, Habsburgs were kind of a gloomy lot, Philip V was a poor symbol for a new age. Even as a young man, he became a hopeless hypochondriac, spending days in bed staring into space and granting a midnight audience to his ministers. Increasingly melancholic, he often refused to shave or change his stinking clothes for months on end. At other times, palace life became the scene of wild and infantile games, with the king and his dwarfs chasing the queen and her ladies-in-waiting, snatching their wigs and tearing their clothes and ripping out handfuls of hair, while giggling themselves to the point of almost passing out. He doesn't sound like he was too stable to me. When they first met, however, shortly after he became king, Philip married the 13-year-old Maria Louisa of Savoy. Okay? Maria Louisa of Savoy. Savoy is a kingdom, a duchy in northern Italy. And this was arranged by his grandfather, Louis XIV. When they first met, it was not only love, but lust at first sight. Philip became deeply in love with Maria from the start, and he quickly became sexually obsessed with her, as his religious scruples prevented him from exercising any sexual life outside of his marriage. Boy, was he a different monarch. Okay? She was also said to be very beautiful and intelligent. Well, I'll let you be the judge. I don't make judgments on these things. I am your mere conduit. Right? She was, as I said to be very beautiful and intelligent. Unlike what was normal for most monarchs, especially the Bourbons, he usually slept in her bed the entire night and insisted upon his marital rights. Now, if you've ever been to Versailles, you've noticed that there was the king's bedroom, and then down the hallway, a very famous hallway, the Hall of Mirrors, there's the queen's bedroom. See? The king and queen slept separately because most kings did not sleep with their wife. They slept with someone else. In French, it was a paramour. Okay? And if the king ever did, he wanted to sleep with his wife occasionally because he wanted an heir to the throne. And he can get all of his mistresses pregnant, but none of them are heirs to the throne. So the king would go sleep with his wife in her bedroom. The wife was never permitted in his bedroom because she might not like what she finds there. Okay? In fact, the queen was guarded by eunuchs, remember? By eunuchs. So that no other man can enter her bedchamber. And if any other man does, the eunuchs were armed and they would kill him. Okay? And they were eunuchs so that in case they engaged in sexual relations with the queen, at least they couldn't get her pregnant. Supposedly. Okay? But don't apply for that job anyway. It's not worth it. Okay? According to one story, Louis XIV had warned Philip not to allow his queen to dominate him. Maria Louisa is described as remarkably mature for her age, politically savvy, articulate, and hardworking. And she has been credited with giving the normally passive Philip V the energy he needed to participate in warfare. As Queen of Spain, Maria Louisa proved very popular with her subjects. She served as regent for her husband on several occasions. Her most successful term was when Philip was away touring his Italian domains for 9 months in 1702. That was during the War of the Spanish Succession. Maria Louisa, who suffered from tuberculosis, died in 1714, right when the war ended. At least partially worn out by her eccentric and oversexed but totally devoted husband, who had to be stopped from crawling into his wife's bed for his marital rights the night before she died. One cynical minister said that all Philip needed to keep him happy was, and I quote, and remember, I'm just a mere conduit, a couch and a woman's thighs, unquote. Enough said. Okay? Well, face those. Bye-bye, Maria. Faced with the forlorn king's mercurial moods, the family immediately set about to find a successor to Maria Louisa. Meanwhile, an Italian priest, later cardinal, by the name of Giuliano Alberoni, there's Giuliano, turned up at court and managed to worm his way into the inner circle, mostly with the inner circle of the court, mostly with the gourmet meals he relished preparing for his friends and victims alike. Who doesn't like Italian food? Yeah. He used his influence as ambassador of Parma to arrange for Elizabeth Farnese, also known as Elizabeth of Parma, an Italian duchy, and she was the niece of the Duke of Parma, to catch the king's eye, and in September of 1814 they were married by proxy in Parma. She later remarked, and I quote, "The Spanish do not like me, but I fully detest them also." Not a healthy attitude for the Queen of Spain. Alberoni, who you can barely see there, Alberoni, who became the new queen's advisor, soon outmaneuvered all others at court. Farnese was a woman of extraordinary energy and willpower. Irresistibly attractive, it was said. I'll let you be the judge again. At least to Philip, who soon became a docile servant to her political and sexual whims. In 1737, Philip's depression became quite serious, so the queen sent for the most famous singer in the world at that time, an Italian castrato named Carlo Farinelli. That's Carlo, whose job was to entertain the king and queen, hoping to soothe his nervous tension. It worked. Philip became mesmerized by the ethereal voice so much that Carlo stayed at court singing the same 4 arias nightly for 10 years, and was also retained by Philip's successor, Ferdinand, for the same purpose. So, there you go. But foreign policy became the queen's plaything. I'm talking about Elizabeth. And her main ambition was to provide thrones for her sons and to try to win back some of the land lost by Spain in the War of the Spanish Succession. So for the next 40 years, Italy, still a loose collection of independent states, remember the map, became the center of Spanish intrigues. Alberoni busied himself reviving the crippled Spanish army and navy and dreaming up bizarre schemes to employ them. Among them was a grandiose plot to persuade Sweden, which was a military power at the time, and Russia to invade Scotland, which was now part of England, on behalf of the Stuart pretender James III. Remember, James II was deposed by Parliament, and William and Mary ruled, and James II's son called himself James III, and he was known as the Great Pretender, because he was pretending to be King of England. And he was going to invade and on behalf of James III. Although the two countries backed out, Alberoni readied an invasion fleet at Cadiz, and James arrived from Rome in March of 1719 and was welcomed with honors worthy of a reigning monarch. The harebrained expedition actually put to sea and was battered by storms and forced to return to port. In the end, Alberoni was deposed, yet despite all the antics at court, Bourbon Spain was different because somehow people thought maybe Spain is making a comeback. It was getting stronger, better governed, believe it or not, more prosperous, more attuned to the rest of Europe. Most important, the centuries-long Castilian push for one unified nation with Madrid supreme became a reality. During this period, the red and gold national flag was adopted, a national anthem chosen, and a regular army formed. In fact, Spain, under the Bourbons, was much more unified at this point than Britain or even France at that time. Under the new order, Aragon and Valencia became subject to Castilian laws and language in all official matters. They didn't like it, but they did. After 2 centuries of struggle, the quasi-independent status of these regions abruptly ended. A military governor reporting directly to the king replaced the old viceroy and financial officers, mostly French functionaries, made sure that the regions were paying their share of taxes. Finally, we can truly say there is a Spain. But because of all the wars, the finances were still strained to the point of bankruptcy in 1739. Spain's role in the War of the Polish Succession, which was a very minor, one of those many, there were dozens of wars of succession, but then later on came the War of the Austrian Succession, and that was a major one, and we'll talk about that one when we get to Austria, proved very costly, yet yielded nothing for Spain. Philip was afflicted by fits of manic depression and increasingly fell victim to a deep melancholy. He died on July 9th, 1746 at El Escorial, outside Madrid, but was buried at his favorite royal palace. We're all dying off here. His favorite royal palace of La Granja de San Ildefonso, near Segovia, Spain. And if you look at that carefully, what does it look like? It looks like Versailles. In fact, there's a courtyard exactly like this at Versailles. And it was built by Philip to remind him of his childhood. And that's where he was buried. It's a copy of Versailles. He greatly missed so much throughout his reign. And his son, Ferdinand VI of Spain, by his first queen, Maria Louisa of Savoy, succeeded him. Okay. Okay, well, let's see. Well, I know what that is. Never mind. Ignore it. If it's what I think it is. I don't know why it's playing now. Anyway, I think we're going to stop there anyway, rather than going on with Ferdinand VI. So, you can listen to the music. This is, I think Beethoven composed this in honor of Wellington. I don't know what it's doing here, but sorry about that. Anyway, thanks for coming. September 17th. Thank you.